So as we turn the page to page 156 in the Panorama workbook, what we're going to see is we want to, I know this is a little bit kind of confusing. This is the part of our Bible that a lot of us don't know very well. It's the part of our Bible that seems to jump around a lot with different names and characters and nations. And I get it. When you look at on page 155, and even with what I just explained, Zerubbabel, and then he goes with Zechariah, how do I fit all this together? I get it. This can be a really challenging part of the Panorama timeline. This is the part of our Bible that's really intimidating for us. And what we want to do right now is just make a quick timeout and try to get us to feel it. Try to get us to experience what this would have been like. I think if we can understand this, if we can place ourselves there, then it helps to give why this is happening in the Bible, why the characters are saying the things that they're saying, why the poetry of the Bible is coming out at this particular style, with this particular style, this particular time. So on page 156, I want you to see it. We're reviewing, how did we get here? The fall of Jerusalem went like this. The people were in rebellion generation after generation. If you look at the biblical account, in 2 Chronicles 36, it says this. It says, "The Lord, Yahweh, the God of their fathers, sent persistently to them by his messengers because he had compassion on his people and his dwelling place." But look at how they responded. Israel, generation after generation, kept mocking the messengers of God, despising his words, scoffing at his prophets, until eventually the discipline of the Lord has risen up. And if you look at the bottom of 2 Chronicles 36, at verse 19, it says, "The Chaldeans, or the Babylonians, have come in, and they burned the house of God. They destroyed the temple. They broke down the walls of Jerusalem. They burned the palace of the king. They destroyed the instruments of worship. They destroy the city. They kill tens of thousands and take tens of thousands away into exile." I know we covered this in the exile movement, but I want you to see the insight at the bottom of page 156. And maybe you can note it. The people, put a box around, the people are rebellious and hard-hearted. They need to be rebuilt. The temple has been destroyed. Put a box around the word temple. It needs to be rebuilt. The walls, put a box around the word walls, are broken down. They need to be rebuilt. And I want you to place yourself into the story. Let's take a break out of the timeline. I want you to think about it. Here you have, imagine being just a regular person living in Jerusalem or in Judah during this particular time. You are going about your life, and the leadership of your country has been, you don't necessarily understand what they're doing. Maybe they're not following Yahweh how you think they should. Maybe you're going right along with them. But here you find yourself in a foreign nation has marched in and laid a siege against your city. They've come in and they've destroyed everything that you've known to be precious. Imagine that in America. Imagine an army marching in to our hometown here and lining up around our little area called Northwest Arkansas, and then marching in and destroying everything that you care about, destroying your house, destroying all of our kind of important landmarks, and then be systematically taking you and your family in file, marching out of the city into foreign territory. Imagine the fear. Imagine the sorrow. Imagine the confusion. What is going on? Where is Yahweh? How could God let this happen? And then imagine being forced to march for hundreds of miles. And what we found archaeologically is when we look at ancient Babylon, we see these records of cities and people listed in these cities. And what we see is, at about this time, is all these Jewish names being placed in these Babylonian cities. And they're especially placed in the region of Babylon where they have huge agricultural fields, and essentially they're growing up as refugee slaves. So picture the refugee camps that we see on TV in different parts of the world. Imagine that scene. You've got a people growing up. You've got the first generation that came out of Israel, out of Judah, and now you've got their children growing up in exile, growing up in foreign territory, growing up away from their home. It's terrifying. It's scary. And we have the same situation in our world right now as people groups migrate and move, are forced to by war, are forced to by disease or famine or things like that. We have a situation even in our own country as people try to immigrate into our southern border. And you can see the fear. You can see the confusion. You can see the terror in these refugees eyes. And that is who the people of Israel are in this time in their history. And the key theological question for them is, why are we here? And the story that the Bible is trying to shout at you and at me is they're in exile because of their rebellion. They're in exile because they refuse to trust Yahweh. So when we read these parts of the Bible, we have to put ourselves there. There is a sorrow, there is a pain, there is a confusion, there is a fear. And it's in this setting, in exile, that the nation of Israel got really, that they got focused on trying to obey the Torah again. They began to put our Bible together as we know it. It was in the exile and in the return of exile that the Old Testament as we know it, they go into exile with these loose collections of scrolls. Many of those scrolls are by prophets they didn't even pay attention to. And as they sit in exile, these leaders begin to say, why are we here? We weren't faithful to Torah. Let's be faithful to Torah. And they began to pull these scrolls together and fashion our Hebrew Bible to what we now know as our Old Testament. This is a really, really important part of our Bible. If you look on page 157, what we want to see is this story unfolded biblically. We see the Babylonian captivity. We see Nebuchadnezzar took into exile in Babylon those who had escaped from the sword. They became servants to him and his sons until the establishment of the kingdom of Persia came to power. Remember our note last week. Cyrus of Persia in 539 conquers Babylon. So imagine that scene. You're a refugee growing up in a foreign territory called Babylon, and now that government has fallen to a whole other foreign government called Persia. And the Persians are the ones that we know from the Battle of Thermopylae, where the Spartan, the 300 brave Spartans face off against the mighty Persian Empire. That is the same empire called Persia, and they are headquartered in what is now Iraq. And so 539, you have this overthrow of the Babylonian government, and the people of Israel find themselves still growing up as refugees. I mean, imagine it. Now, in 157, at the bottom of page 157, we see Persian rule, and we're going to get the biblical account. 2 Chronicles 36, verse 21. As God has sent Israel in his discipline into exile, he told them that this exile was going to last for 70 years so that the land could enjoy its Sabbaths. And we see this on verse 21. The land enjoyed its Sabbath rests. All the time of its desolation it rested until the 70 years were completed. In the first year, verse 22, of Cyrus king of Persia, in order to fulfill the word of the Lord spoken by Jeremiah. Now we're going to see that in just a minute. The Lord moved the heart of Cyrus, king of Persia, to make a proclamation throughout his realm and also put it in writing. This is what Cyrus, king of Persia, says. The Lord, the God of heaven, has given me all the kingdoms of the earth, and he has appointed me to build a temple for him at Jerusalem and in Judea. Any of his people among you may go up, and may the Lord their God be with them. Now here's the thought. The Persians have watched, and they have seen the Assyrians and the Babylonians try to rule with an iron fist, try to rule by enslaving, try to rule by sending people away from their homeland. And the Persians have realized that's not a great foreign policy. It only makes people angry with you. And you end up settling Persians in Israel, and they don't know anything about Israel. So what the Persians decided was, it's better to let the people go back to their own countries, and then we will rule them from Persia. They will pay us taxes. They will pay us tribute. If they mess with us, we'll come kill them. But it's better to have them go back to their land. The Romans, by the way, will perfect this. They will create what we later know as the Pax Romana, the Roman peace. But the Persians are the ones who first kind of realized, let's let people go back to their homelands. And what the Bible is telling us is this has all happened. All this foreign policy change, all of this nation states, all this is happening at exactly the will of Yahweh. None of it is out of control for Yahweh. And the key theological question that we have at the bottom of this page, on page 157, is this: why the 70 years? That's number 7 is going to be really important. And the question also is, what the heck's a Sabbath rest? Why do we need Sabbath rest? And if you turn the page, you can see this is a detailed explanation for you to understand on page 158 why God has ordered them to reflect and rest, to pause, rest, and reflect that He is the one bringing order to their life. He is the one who is sovereign over everything. He is the one they should trust. They refuse to, and so God gives them over so that the land may enjoy its Sabbath rests. So as we look now at the return, how is God going to get them back into their land? It is helpful for us to pause and reflect on the fear, on the confusion, on the wonder of the people growing up in exile at this time. And then as God begins to move and God begins to work, what we're going to see is He's always working with His promises in mind. He's faithful, He hasn't forgotten, He is good, and we're going to see that come to fruition as we look at page 159.